Gallium is vital for Taiwan's chip production, while neodymium powers magnets in military radar systems. China has near monopoly on both these critical minerals, along with numerous others essential for Taiwan's industries and defense systems. Now, to understand Taiwan's position when it comes to sourcing critical minerals and how it can make its supply chain less vulnerable to Beijing's whims, we are joined by Gracelin Baskaran, Director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies, and she's joining us from Denver, Colorado. Gracelin, so how does China's mineral dominance and recent export controls, I would say, affect Taiwan's semiconductor industry?
So all of these export restrictions ultimately lead to supply chain disruptions for long enough. In many ways, a lot of these companies have created stockpiles to protect in the case of disruptions, but stockpiles don't last forever inherently. Minerals like gallium actually have a shelf life of about a year, which means that if you stockpile them for 3 years and then you take them off, they're not effective for their end use. So really what it is, it's putting a lot of pressure on companies to identify sustainable long-term alternative solutions for supply chain security or risk disruptions down the road.
Okay, so let's take a look at the situation here in Taiwan. Ray Jiawei, the Director of Science and Engineering Research Center at the CTCI Foundation in Taipei, recently said that Taiwan is in the second row of the tsunami when it comes to China's export restrictions on critical minerals. We asked him to explain.
中国管制关键矿物出口对台湾的影响，主要在加者相关的特化产品特化产品，因为台湾产业主要是使用特用化学品比较不担心关键矿物特别是半导体的产业除非是那些制造特用化学品的国家，例如像日本、像德国日本譬如说像信越化学那还有德国像默克等等这样的一个供应商如果他们是算海啸第一排，我们是从日德这样的一个供应商进口所谓的这个特用化学品那如果说海啸第一排像日本、德国这样的信越化学、默克等等这样的厂商他们有供应不足的问题，才会影响到台湾的半导体产业，所以我才说是海啸第二排
Now, Taiwan is building up its indigenous weapon systems. A lot of that, of course, uses semiconductors, but it also is affecting drones and missiles, the production of drones and missiles, which is one of the focuses. How would that be hamstrung if China decides that it will start restricting critical minerals or the refining of critical minerals to Taiwan?
So China is building not only its minerals dominance, but it's also building its defense industrial base and its surge capabilities. So what's been happening as China has limited the export of these key minerals needed for some of these defense technologies, it is essentially stockpiling them and increasing their manufacturing of these key technologies. Where China decides to put a chokehold on these minerals, it means that countries around the world, and particularly Taiwan in this era of geopolitical tension, are not able in the instance of conflict or war to surge or produce more of these critical technologies needed to protect itself. And that automatically gives China an advantage. Now, in the long term, what this means is that China holds an incredible amount of leverage for the rest of the world's ability to defend itself. And we're seeing this feature more strongly from other countries in the Indo-Pacific. So a lot of the conversations in places like Australia with minerals are coming back to, Indo-Pacific security now.
Right. So China first weaponized rare earths in 2010 when it banned exports to Japan over a fishing trawler dispute. Since then, Japan has steadily reduced its reliance on Chinese rare earths. We asked Ray Jiawei what Taiwan's takeaway should be from Japan's experience.
日本一样，跟台湾一样，在稀土的这个矿产的出产量上面是比较弱的所以它呢积极的跟其他的国家做国际合作，跟有稀土储量跟产量有这些丰富储量产量国家像类似像越南像澳洲啦等等这些国家，甚至马来西亚来合作来补强他们在上游以及中游加工精炼不足的一些能力日本它有积极在进行所谓的国际合作，让 去取得多元料源的多元供应链的策略那除此之外呢，那它还有所谓的一个战略的储备的制度那不只是稀土这些很关键的这个关键矿物来讲的话包括中国所限制的这几波的关键矿物的出口管制，这些稀贵金属关键矿物来讲的话，在日本在这个因为钓鱼台事件之后，他们也开始积极的来拟定所谓的这个战略储备的一个制度，所以你会看到有一些报道说，它依赖中国的程度已经降至从2010年所谓的90%的程度，降到现在目前为止大概50%-60%的一个程度。那日本甚至更喊出，今年年底前一定要达到，甚至降到50%。那所以中国大陆管制稀土，日本的经验是可以参考的。
Ray Jiawei talks about Japan's stockpiling system that it's developed to secure its mineral security. What do you think Taiwan should be taking away from this, given that its semiconductor industry is so critical for its entire economy and its defense industry?
We have a lot to learn from Japan globally. And in fact, if you actually look at key markets globally, everybody is working to build its stockpiles. So in the US, this year's budget bill that was passed by Congress actually set aside an additional $2 billion to building a more robust mineral stockpile. At the same time, in the last few months, Australia announced the creation of a $1.2 billion stockpile for its own national security use. Really the only way, in addition to identifying alternate sources, which can take a long time, and developing new mines, which globally on average from the time that I identify a deposit to the time that I'm producing is 18 years, the third option is to build a more robust stockpile. So we're seeing that not only should Taiwan, continue to build its stockpiles, but cooperating with allies to build a joint stockpile seems to be a really important way forward.
Speaking of cooperating with allies, the U.S. is possibly Taiwan's biggest ally, but the U.S. is also scrambling to shore up its supplies. So how much could Taiwan really rely on the U.S. when it comes to critical minerals or rare earths to help its supply chain?
It's actually it's a two-way road, because at the end of the day, we still rely on Taiwan for semiconductors. So Taiwan actually not lacking the minerals that it needs to produce those is ultimately a disadvantage to the United States. It's a highly integrated semiconductor market in that way. So when you think about it from that perspective, is really it can't be this or that, or else we won't have a semiconductor. Cooperating, ensuring that we are working not only bilaterally, but in terms of securing minerals from third markets is a really crucial way forward.
So Taiwan, in that case, Taiwan and Australia are increasing cooperation on rare earths to build a China-independent supply chain. How realistic is that? And how much of the void can it fill if China decides that it is going to pull back on its supplies to Taiwan?
Australia is a super crucial country for probably four reasons. So the first reason is geology. Last year, it garnered about 45% of global exploration for rare earths. The amount of rare earth projects that are under development in Australia is unrivaled in the ex-China market globally. The second thing, they are building refineries. So they have a refinery, Iluka, for example, that received $1.25 billion of government funding. They also have Lynas, another big company. The third area they have an advantage in is just financing. Rare earth production and processing are incredibly expensive, and the Australian Stock Exchange has one of the biggest sources of capital for the mining sector. And the fourth factor, which is maybe even the most important, is it is the biggest hub of global expertise for minerals and rare earths outside of China. They have 4 of the top 12 mine engineering programs in the world. So when you look at the technical expertise, the financial capital, the geology, and the advancements they've made on processing, Australia is perhaps one of the most crucial partners for creating a more diverse and resilient rare earth space. And they really are, under this administration, throwing the weight of their efforts to do that.
And speaking of financial capital, one of the things China had been doing is price gouging, where companies, rare earth companies, perhaps even in the US, have set up and started production And China's managed to undercut them in prices, which makes them non-viable and not profitable and not be able to survive. So in that sense, what is being done to make sure that these companies, which perhaps wouldn't be able to survive without some kind of subsidy or government help, what is being done for them in the US, and what would your advice be for other countries who are looking to create their own rare earth industries?
It's a great question, Divya. You know, one of the biggest challenges we're up against our time is that China has increased its production so much for a range of commodities. It's forcing prices down. And if you think about something we call neodymium praseodymium oxide, which is a rare earth oxide, you know, if prices stay below $60 by 2030, there are only 8 projects outside of China that will even break even with direct production costs. That is the driving reason that this year the United States rolled out a price floor. And they set the price floor when they signed this. It was only about $54 a kilogram. Now, the price floor was set at $120. And when you think about that, that is a huge increase. But really what the US government was doing was creating a signal that it was going to provide this minimum price to incentivize some of these larger investments. One of the conversations globally is, and for cooperation, is can we do price floors more broadly? We were really lucky at CSIS a couple of weeks ago to host Ambassador Kevin Rudd, who is also the 26th Prime Minister of Australia. And one of the areas that he highlighted for the ongoing negotiation of cooperation between the United States and Australia is a joint price floor. And ultimately, what we do with this from rare earths, we can replicate across other commodities, because the downfall of prices owing to overpriced or overproduction of Chinese commodities has driven lithium prices down 85% in the last 3 years, nickel down 80%, cobalt 60%. So a price floor is going to be really important to creating a market outside of China where Western companies have a shareholder responsibility.
But how does a price floor work if China's going to continue flooding the market with cheaper alternatives? Because how would it be profitable for companies that are currently using those minerals?
So there's 2 things that are really important to price floor. The first thing is that whenever the prices fall below that certain level, right? So let's say that the price floor is $110, but the current going price is $80. The government would essentially pay that $30 difference to the company on a quarterly basis to ensure that they are getting a minimum amount. What we've also seen, the second point, is that Western companies don't really want to rely on China for their supply chains. And that's why we've seen Apple go public, that it signed a deal with MP Materials for rare earths. We saw General Motors has signed a deal with Novion Magnetics here in the US to get those permanent magnets. Is companies are rapidly also willing to pay a premium to not have their supply chain held hostage. For example, after the rare earth export restrictions, we saw that Ford, the car company, actually just stopped manufacturing their Explorer model owing to a shortage of these rare earths in Chicago. Stopping production is extremely expensive for these companies. So the way it works is both that companies are guaranteed a minimum price and the government pays the difference, but it also ensures that the economy is sustainable, that there's no layoffs because these companies don't have to stop production, and it creates the incentive to, even if you pay a little more, you don't worry about a stoppage.
So the underlying solution seems to be government initiative and intervention in the sector. So for somewhere like Taiwan, how much is the government can support the sector, but how much what other alternatives are there in sourcing rare earths and critical minerals? Is recycling a viable option given its huge tech industry here and probably the tech waste that we see?
So to the first point, we're not going to solve this problem without government intervention, because China had so much government intervention, and it continues to have that in terms of state-backed financing, state-financed infrastructure for mines. The world outside of China is not operating on a level playing field of a free market with China. So at that extent, we have to intervene with government support to allow our private sector to more effectively compete and to create an enabling environment for them. So that's the first point. To your second point about recycling, recycling is incredibly important, but we're not at the technical know-how to recycle all minerals in the same way. The example I'm going to give you is lithium. 15 years ago, we could not get 80% of lithium out of a lithium ion battery. Today, we can often get 98% of lithium out of a lithium ion battery, which reduces the amount of primary material we need to get out of the ground because we have more secondary material coming online. The rare earths recycling market is actually relatively nascent. And historically here in the United States, we have actually sent our MRI scanners or our wind turbines back to China to recycle those rare earths because we lacked those capabilities here in the US. Going forward, we've seen this administration put an incredible focus on trying to develop those recycling capabilities for black mass here at home so we don't have to send it out. So ultimately, as we invest more into research and development, as we invest more into recycling facilities, we should be able to get more and more of that material back out. But it is a nascent industry and it too takes time from a technological perspective.
All right, we're just about running out of time here, Gracelin, but as a parting shot for Taiwan, what would be the key message you would have for Taiwan, and particularly with its industries that rely so heavily on rare earths and critical minerals, and two, the fact that its defense industry really needs to be viable, given its big neighbor that controls that rare earth industry that threatens Taiwan quite periodically?
The entire world relies on the semiconductors coming out of Taiwan. So it is actually in the economic and national security interest of all of these allied countries to support Taiwan with resilient supply chains, not only to source minerals, but to assist with building processing capabilities for these minerals and ensure that those minerals end up back in Taiwan for manufacturing. So international cooperation will be critical because it's not like all of these minerals are going to come out of the ground in Taiwan now or in the future. So really leveraging all of the companies in the ecosystem from allied countries is the only way we're going to counter China in a meaningful way. It is by no way going to be done by a single country.
Thank you so much, Gracelin Baskaran, for a great discussion. It was great to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.